Yeah.
Ready, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. With the presence of a quorum, we will get the meeting of the Oahu Real Property Tax Advisory Commission Valuation Committee ready to order. First of all, anybody who hasn't signed up and would like to, there are some sign-up forms in the corner over here, and if you would hand them to my commission aide, we'll make sure that you're signed up to testify. Otherwise, please raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak at the time I call for additional speakers, following the testimonies of registered speakers. Each speaker is limited to a 3-minute presentation on all items. Each speaker may testify for him or herself and may not speak on another's behalf. Written testimonies, including the testifier's address, email address, and phone number, may be posted by the city clerk and available to the public on the city's Oahu Real Property Tax Advisory Commission website and DocuShare website. For cell phones, as a courtesy, please turn them off, put them on vibrate or turn them off. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I would like to note the presence of Commissioner Scott Higashi, who's also a committee member, and Ray Kamikawa, who is the chair of the commission. And hopefully Earl will show up soon. The commission will now take testimony on all items on the agenda. We will call on testifiers in the order in which your name is submitted. If you have not yet signed up, please do so now. I indicated where the sign-up forms are. When you're called, please come to the testifier's table, state your name and the item to which you are testifying, and whether you support, oppose, or have comments on the measure. You have 3 minutes to speak, and your cooperation will be greatly appreciated. So our first speaker, and only speaker today, who's registered anyway, is Chin James. Chin, would you like to come forward?
Good afternoon. It's nice. Hi, I'm Chin James from Kahuku, and I have been a real estate broker for over 30 years. So I have seen the trend of what's happening on this island. And you know, I just want to say that I understand that property tax is a necessary evil. That's our main source of income. But I really feel like increasingly we need to protect our core residents who have been here for decades. Those are the people in my real estate transaction and happenings are beginning to suffer more and more. And I'm happy to you know, listen to that discussion of valuation methods. My main pet peeve and my main goal and my dream and wish for this island is that we will come to be able to have a cap on property taxes for core residents who have lived here. And I just throw out the number 15 years, who live here more than 15 years, there's got to be a cap on it. Exemption of 10% or 60,000, those are manini because you know, we can put, let's say, add an additional 80,000 exemption, but the property taxes are going up so high that 80,000 doesn't mean a thing, you know, in the equation. I also realized that property tax is always the low-hanging fruit, you know. Anytime someone wants money, oh, that's a property tax, you know. Property tax for education, property tax for this, property tax for this. It's always a low-hanging fruit. And I know that some people who have also said that, oh, Hawaii, you guys have such low property taxes. Well, yeah, on face value it's true, but if you consider the overall picture, we are paying a lot. Our average property price is $800,000. So there's already a different. Our cost of living, our milk costs 3 times as much as in Indiana, and our insurance and everything costs more. So when people say that, oh, Hawaii, you guys have low income tax, you can afford to pay more, that is not a correct factual statement. Also, I wanted to say that with the recent increase on residential A property taxes, we're actually negatively affecting the social fabric of our island. So we have some people who are landlords because that was how they planned it. And now, because if their property goes up beyond 1 million, it goes into the residential A category, and which has actually tripled. The property taxes actually tripled. And so many of our local landlords have been renting to local tenants, and some of them have not even given rent increase for decades because they have become good friends and because they're good tenants. But if the property tax continue to keep escalating, the landlord is going to have to pass it to the tenant, and some have already passed to the tenant, and then the tenants then have to pay higher renters, right? You know, and guess what? So many are living paycheck to paycheck. If they have to increase that rent, we're going to have more homeless on the street. And we actually have a lot of people, maybe not everybody talks about it. We actually have people who are living in cars and living, checking up with so-and-so and this and that because they cannot afford to pay the increased rent. So that's just one, consequence. And I think people need to understand that landlord of residential A properties are also providing a service. We also have a lot of people now in the market saying, hey, I'm getting really fed up. I'm just going to sell my investment properties and just invest my money in the mainland. But there are consequences to that too, because if you have a local owner who then turns and sell their rental property and invest in the mainland, most probably out-of-state people will come in. And when they come in, they're not going to be charging the low rents that our local landlords are doing. So that's that there too. And then I also want to add that a landlord is not wealthy. There are some landlords who are wealthy, but generally our local landlords are not wealthy people. This is an extra source of income that they have planned out, and there are other expenses. Besides property taxes, you have to pay insurance for fire, for flood, right? And then you had to pay to repair the refrigerator, plumbing problems. You had to tent the place. So some of the landlords now are actually paying like 5 months of their property taxes out of their rent, monthly rent. And if you include, the other expenses, the income is getting less and less and less. So I think that the government, needs to be cognizant about that. Just one quick story. I had written article for Star Advertiser, and someone called me up and said, I'm so happy you kind of understand our situation. I want to share with you mine. She said that I got married and we have a child, and that child turned out to be a special needs child. And so my husband and I were deciding what we could do, and we thought, okay, we could buy another property so that it will be an extra income to help us. And she said, with those people, we live so frugal. We buy secondhand cars, we don't go on vacations. My husband worked his tail off to fix the house, and so so they say we're receiving the income. But now it's getting to be so hard because the income that we are hoping to have is getting smaller and smaller. And she said something funny. She said, I wish I had gone on vacations like some people do. Now we're in our 70s and we feel like our health is not so good. We cannot go on vacations anymore. So I'm, those are real stories out there. So I really hope that we can work something out where we can put a cap, a freeze on property tax for core owners, because it's just not the low class or the low income class. The middle class is hurting. A lot of the older folks are worried that they cannot hang on to their property, and they're worried that when they pass on, their children cannot hang on to their property. So I hope that we'll begin a robust discussion on that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for her? No? Okay, thank you, Chin. Anybody else like to testify? Seeing none, we'll move on then to our, the rest of our agenda. Our first item of discussion is valuation methods, and I, first of all, wanted to just apologize to commissioners and Ray that I misread Steve Takara's email and didn't confirm today's meeting with him and didn't realize he had something else, so I apologize for that. But who would like to start on the discussion of valuation methods? I know, Ray, you had some initial concerns. Would you like to start the discussion?
Oh, thank you. I learned about the valuation methods when handling real property tax appeals on behalf of some of my clients. And it was revealed to me that the city adopted a new template to value improvements, both residential and commercial, called the Marshall and Swift methodology, which was also revealed to us at our first commission meeting, as you recall, by Steve Takara. And I think that we should have some transparency in the Marshall and Swift template, what it's about, what impact it has had on valuations both on residential and commercial properties, how assessors are relying on the methodology, how it came about that Marshall and Swift became the template, how it's being implemented in valuations, what impact it has had altogether, starting in 2018, I believe. Also in my experience in representing taxpayers, and I'm asking for more transparency, I think. Another valuation issue has to do with the valuation methodologies that are authorized to be considered by the assessors right now. And you'll see this in the page 2 of Bill 49 that's attached to your materials. This has to do with the proposal on the cap on increases in valuations for homes. But it does, in Section 3, make a technical amendment. But that Section 3 refers to Section 8-7.1, and that's where you have the two methodologies that are authorized to be considered by the assessors: market data and cost approaches. For some reason, way back when, I believe we did have a third methodology that was referred to as the income method. That was taken out in the past, so I'm suggesting that we consider the income methodology that is used by other jurisdictions in the country. More background on that methodology, why it is being used by other jurisdictions and not in Hawaii, and whether we should be considering adopting the income methodology to value properties, especially on the commercial side as well. Thank you.
Okay, so you don't know why that was taken out or when it was taken out?
I haven't done the research, so I'm hoping that Steve Takara or somebody in the administration can explain that.
Okay, so I'll follow up with him, then make sure we add that to his list
Yeah.
of questions.
Thank you.
Do you have anything, Scott?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I would agree with Commissioner Kamikawa. I do think that the issue is one of transparency, and the system being used by the city for valuation, I'm almost certain that there is no easy transparency for taxpayers to understand that. I also would worry that national platforms or software-based platforms that are not necessarily sensitive to local nuances or neighborhood nuances in Hawaii may misstate values up or down because it's very difficult to value property on a standard platform. And, I think that values do go up in Hawaii. We are a land-limited jurisdiction. There's no question that the amount of housing that can be built is limited, and that often does fuel property values to go up because of limited supply, but it was surprising to me, both as a commissioner and as a taxpayer, that they're using a methodology that's new. I don't think there's transparency to that. I think the key is transparency. That's not to say the methodology is flawed. That's not to say that that there's something wrong. It's just there is no transparency to the public, and therefore, I think that's one thing that we should insist upon, some means by which transparency can be achieved. The other thing I would say is, Mr. Takara had referenced the fact that the number of appeals by taxpayers had not necessarily changed, but I would challenge whether the number of appeals, given the process and cost, is a good indicator of whether or not the taxpayers are aware of how the system works and how valuation works. I don't think the two are necessarily related, and I would not necessarily agree that the number of appeals submitted to the city for consideration of revaluation for tax purposes is an indicator of whether people have a comprehension or agreement of the valuation methodologies.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that as well. First of all, in order to even appeal, there has to be a 5%, at least a 5% increase in the assessed value to begin with. And then, as you mentioned, there's the fee that needs to be filed along with that. And then I think there's still a 2-year backlog. So, that can be daunting for some people, I think. And they're just like, well, it's not worth my time to try to do that. So I would agree it's not really indicative of how people feel about the assessments and the approach that's being taken to value their properties. So I did get some information that from a resident who shared I think it was seven properties, and I just wanted to share it with the committee to take a look at these properties and see, how they've increased over the years. And one of the things, I don't know what the TMKs are on these properties, but they are all pretty high in assessed values, as you can see, over $1 million. The one question I would really like to have answered is, how come this one property had 100% exemption for several years? I'm not aware of any law that was put into place that would have allowed that. That was from 2006 to 2012. So I don't know if you had any questions or comments on these particular properties. I did do that summary just to kind of show the increases from 2001 to 2010 and then 2010 to 2019 on the total property assessed value. So without taking into consideration any exemptions that might be on the properties, because that does tend to vary over the years and with the property and type of owner. Any questions or comments on those at all at this time? No? Okay. All right, so we'll just have that, I guess, for future reference. I will follow up with Steve Takara then on the comments you just made about the methodology and why the income method was taken out. I did also send him some requests for information, such as the agreement, the contract with Marshall and Swift and CoreLogic, because I'm not sure exactly who is the entity, which entity is contracting with the city. I asked for a comparison of the last 5 years in assessed values for all by property type by year, just so we could kind of get a better feel for the last few years before the change and then after. And then some of the questions that had come up previously I also sent to him. So I will work with him on our next meeting so that we can have him present and able to provide that information for us. Okay, so if there's no more discussion on that, then we'll go ahead and move forward to the next item, which is Bill 49. This did pass first reading at the City Council yesterday, and it is a bill that would put a cap on assessed values for certain properties with homeowner exemptions. So would anybody like to start us on discussion with that particular item? Or any opinions about it one way or another? No? I'll start then. Okay, well, so first of all, you heard our testifier mention that she felt that long-term residents should have some type of relief with respect to their properties as far as increasing values. I think, there's a general assumption out there that long-term property owners, residential homeowners who've been here for a while will be here for a long time, and they are maybe land rich but money poor. And when the taxes increase, they have a hard time making that payment and making ends meet because these taxes continue to go up. So I think that's the attempt behind Bill 49. You might have noticed that it puts I think it's a 2% cap on, let's see here, 2% per year, which my concern would be that is very low and too low. Our real property taxes provide the foundation for our city services, and it increases. I don't have the number offhand, but 5 to 6% comes to mind for some reason. So my concern would be that this particular cap is too low. It does also have some, if the property is sold, then the cap wouldn't apply anymore. Or if there are certain improvements, then the cap would there would be different treatments in case there are certain improvements with the property. So, do you guys want to take a position on the bill at all, or?
Well, I guess I would just say that one of your comments is interesting, because I think there is an effect, with longevity of ownership. There's a presumption that as the resident gets older, maybe they retire, and I think the exemption amounts were designed to address that potential, fixed income to lower income once you're not generating, you're not working, and that's why it's age based. Right now, you get a higher exemption. I would agree though that just because the exemption is 80,000 or 120,000, whatever the case may be, that may not be sufficient depending on how the property has appreciated in value. So one thought on the bill is to examine whether or not this is if there is going to be a cap, first of all, whether tiering is based on longevity of ownership or age of resident. Based on longevity of ownership, is whether that is another way to look at trying to address what I think this bill is trying to address is not impairing the taxpayer or burdening the taxpayer with these higher and higher taxes when they just can't keep up with it. But I think an across the board cap of 2% is low. It's probably unrealistic, and it would probably result in other budget implications downstream. So I don't know what the right number is. I do think, though, that to the testifier's credit, there is this thought that the exemption amount I think there's two areas to focus: the exemption amount and the percentage multiplier used based on value. But really, it's the valuation that's driving all of this. So that's why I think that's why the subcommittee is trying to take it up and say, well, gee, what is that methodology? How are we arrived at? Because that's where I don't think we've ever really examined as being the core of it all, because you can change the percentages. We do have a very, very low property tax percentage. Problem is our values accelerate. But the other thing I'll say is that some of the samples you showed, that not all properties are appreciating at this value, and so there is variation, wide variation. Small condominium in Makiki may be very, very different from appreciation in Kahala or the North Shore. So it's not. I think it's somewhat complicated. So I go back to, I wonder how the Marshall and Swift system is examining that. whether it's just across the board, whether they're accounting for these nuances, I have no idea. I feel like if we're commissioners on a advisory commission for real property tax and we have no idea how valuations arrived at, it's a very difficult proposition to be a commissioner because I can't even answer that question. So I think there are some additional information to gather, but I generally would agree that setting a cap at 2%, given the historical appreciation for Hawaii in general, is probably too low.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Ray, do you have anything to add?
No,
No,
not at this
okay.
time. Thank you.
Okay, well, you know what? This was just first reading, and I agree we have a lot to learn as far as what the current methodology is, how it was implemented, and whether it has or how it has impacted the valuations. I should also mention that with respect to that comparison, I did ask for it also by area, so we should be able to tell, you know, for example, Kalihi is going to have different valuations than somewhere on the east side or up on the north shore. And so my hope is that they'll put that into a format that we can use. I've seen it done in the paper, so I know it has been done in the past. And if we get that then for the next meeting, I think that will be very helpful for us.
Can I make just a comment?
Okay, since we have some time, why don't you go? You want to sit down and identify yourself again?
Yeah, Chin James, I think one of the very stark difference between us and the mainland too is, you know, you go to the mainland, Washington, wherever, they all have subdivisions, yeah. Most of them have subdivisions, and all those 1,000 homes, 3,000 homes, they're all cookie cutter homes. They're all the same. Maybe one subdivision has 5 models. But here in Hawaii, it was so chop suey. You know, if you go to Lanikai or North Shore or anywhere else, you can have a really Junkalanka Hicks home. And next door to it, someone has bought it and turned it into a huge, expensive mansion. So, like what Higashi said, we do really have a lot of nuances. You just cannot put a blanket across the road, across the board valuation because we're so different. I mean, seriously, you can have a really $11 million homes, and then next door is a family that has owned it for 4 generations, and it's still a really small Hicks home. So it raises a lot of issues, and I think we have got to somehow have a sense of fairness in this valuation. And my past understanding is that the city only has like 6 appraisers taking care of the whole island.
Thank you, Chin. I should also mention that we are being recorded through auditory means, and so I didn't identify myself initially, Natalie Iwasa, and I should have mentioned it as we were going through. I forgot to remind you guys, but that's okay. Okay, so I think what we'll do then is, we definitely need to learn more before we take a position on this, or maybe even recommend changes or how that might be handled. Is there any more discussion then on Bill 49? No? Seeing none. Okay. We'll move on then with announcements. So our next meeting, actually, I had scheduled it for September 12th, and Stephen is not available that day. So is it okay if I try to get a sense of when we can meet? Yeah, so I didn't put out a poll, but should we try to meet before the 19th again, do you think?
No.
Okay, so I will put out a poll and try to see whether we can meet before the full commission meeting, which is the 19th. No, not the 12th. So yeah, please cancel the room for that day.
While we're all here, I was just wondering if the 17th is enough time, or Monday.
That's a Monday?
Yeah.
Is the
17th is Tuesday. Monday is the 16th.
What is is the room available?
It should be available. This week is
Oh, okay.
not, but this week should be.
Okay, so the 17th at 1 o'clock. That's a Tuesday. If that's good for you, Scott,
Yes,
I'll
it is.
follow up with Earl. So, and then I need to follow up with Steve to make sure that he can make it that day at 1 o'clock. And if so, then I'll go ahead and set that and put out an agenda for that as well. Okay, are there any other announcements then?
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. Okay, so if there are no objections, this meeting will be adjourned. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.